Hi, I'm Philip from the HANA Academy. In this series of videos, we're looking at the XS Advanced model. In this video, we're going to get started using XS Advanced when you're with HANA 2.0 SPS 0. Now there's some initial configuration you'll need to do once XS Advanced has been installed, and that's what we're going to look at in this video. Then you'll be able to get going using Web IDE for HANA, for example, the web-based developer tooling. Let's assume that HANA has been installed and XS was installed with all components. That's one of the options in installation. An admin user will have been created, typically XSA_admin. That's the default name with the password. That's something you're going to want to know to do this configuration. And also you'll know the fully qualified domain name, or the URL effectively we're going to use to connect to XS. Now I'm going to assume that it's been installed using a port-based routing, and that otherwise pretty much the defaults for XS installation have been taken place. So it's kind of a vanilla system. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to connect to the XS controller, and we can do that through a URL. Now by default HTTPS is used, so I'm going to do HTTPS. So let's do that. ://. Then I'm going to paste in basically the URL, the machine where XS has been installed, and it does need to be the fully qualified domain name. Then I'm going to put in : for a port, and then 3, and then the instance number. Now typically is going to be 00, but it could be anything between 00 and 99. So your HANA instance number, and then 30, and then /v2/info. Now this should allow us to connect to the controller. Now you may well get a message in your browser saying that this connection is not private. That's because it's an HTTP site, and by default the installation will use a self-signed certificate. So your browser naturally wants you to be wary. There are two ways around this. One is that the administrator, the person that sets up and installs HANA, if it's not yourself, will actually go and create a correct certificate and configure XS with that certificate. Or for us, for this example, you can just bypass the issue by going to Advanced when I'm using Chrome, and then proceed to the site. It will warn you that it's unsafe, but we know in our case that actually it's a system we're comfortable with. Now what we'll see normally behind here is some JSON, and in the JSON we can see we've got the XS controller and all sorts of good information about it. And what we're looking here is the service URLs item, and we can see we've got XSA-admin. And this is where we get the URL of the administrator. And effectively, because this is using port-based routing, it's the same URL we were using. The difference is just the port number is different. In my case, it's 51019. So I'm going to copy that and then paste that in, because I want to be able to connect to the administrator. So I'm going to log in, and this is where I need to use that XSA_admin, or whatever the admin user was when XS was installed, with the password that was specified at that point. So we can see that the administrator comes up. We'll see we've got an application monitor. We're going to need this shortly. We can see what we'll see here is all of the different apps that are up and running. If we also go back, we'll see we've got the ability to manage our organizations and spaces, and also build roles. So we go into the application role builder, and we need to go to the configure role collections here at the bottom. And you'll see that we have a number of role collections, but we don't have anything for Web IDE for HANA. So what we need to do is add one for developer, one for administrator. So I'll go to the bottom, hit the plus sign, and I'm going to add a new role collection, for example, Web IDE_developer. Okay, with a description. Hit create, and I'm going to need to specify the roles that belong in there. And for that one, I'm going to go to the Roles tab and then hit plus to add. And I'm going to look for the template actually that starts with Web IDE. Then that's the name, then the template. You'll see it's got Web IDE developer already defined, application role. So select everything basically Web IDE developer. So that's now done. I can save it. And I'm also going to add one for the Web IDE administrator. So Web IDE_. Of course, you can call it whatever you want. And I'm going to add the appropriate role for that. So in the Roles tab, I'm going to add, And here, again, it's Web IDE. We need to select as the application name. And then in the template, there are two available, and we choose the Web IDE administrator, and then the application role that belongs with it as well. And save. So we've basically now set up a couple of roles that we can then use to assign to different users in the system to give them either developer or admin rights on Web IDE for HANA. So let's go back to the home. We can go to our user management page, and we can look at actually our own user, XSA admin, and we can see the role collections that it's got. So we're missing Web IDE administrator here. We're going to want to do some administration. So what we can do is choose the add button, and we can add a role collection, and I'm going to choose specifically Web IDE administrator. Hit OK, so that's now done, and we need to save that. Now, whilst I'm here, perhaps I want to make a developer user as well that can do development with XSA. So I'm going to add a new user, and to do that I can use new. Now, you don't need to go into HANA Studio or use SQL to create the users. This is something great with SPS 0 of HANA 2. You can just create them directly here. So a new user, so maybe I'll call it XSA_dev, but of course you can call it whatever you want, XSA developer, XSA dev at myorg.com, etc., etc., and give it a password. Bear in mind that this initial password will by default need to be changed on the first login. So we've created our XSA developer user. Now let's go and administrate it. We need to set a role, and specifically, as well as this default user public role, we want to make sure that this user is allowed to do Web IDE development, but not administration. So we add that one. But what we should also do is make sure he gets access to the XS controller. So as a user, we also should select the XS controller user role. So we see those two have been added. We need to go and save that. Okay, so we've now created our users. We need to find somewhere that our XSA developer can actually do his development. So for that, we can go to the Organization and Space Management area. Now, when HANA was installed and XS was installed, a default org will have been set up. In my case, the org was called SAP HANA Academy. You can have multiple orgs. You can create more orgs here, in fact, as you want. But we can see that the org name I've got is SAP HANA Academy. And within that, we have a couple of spaces, one called SAP, which is where the SAP provide apps, including things like Web IDE for HANA and the administrator that we're using right now belong. And there was one that was created by default called prod, maybe for productive use, but I want a space where we can do development. You can create any number of spaces that you want within an organization. So I'm going to create a new space, and I'll call it dev, but of course you can call it whatever you like. And within that new space, I need to define who can use it and what roles they have. So I'll click on dev and go to the users area, and I'm going to add a couple of users. In fact, we've got two in our system, XSA admin and developer. So I'm going to add them both. And then in terms of the roles I'm going to give them, well, for XSA admin, I'm going to give him manager, auditor, and developer rights. For the developer user, just going to have developer rights. So I need to save that. So now we've got an XSA developer user that is able to use this new developer space that we've created. Now, all of this is possible using the command line, but actually I think you'll find it's much easier with HANA 2 to do it through this XS Advanced Administrator application. So that's now done. We've created our users, we've created our space. However, before we can actually go building things within that space using Web IDE for HANA, we need to do one further bit of configuration, and that is basically to enable the space for development. And to do that, we need to use a special UI called the Space Provisioning UI, or the Space Enablement tool. Now, it's not on the menu here. What you need to do is go into the Application Monitor and look for an application called DI-Space Enablement or Space Provisioning UI. So let's have a look down, DI, and there we've got DI Space Enablement UI. This is the app that you need to use. And as the XS administrator, we can use it because we've just set ourselves up as an administrator for the development space. So you can go directly to it. Just go to the URL. It will tell you the URL. In this case, it's port 51027. But just click on it and it will open it up in a new tab. So we can see we now got the Space Enablement UI. The development space exists because we've created, but it's not enabled. So what we need to do is enable it by clicking the enable button, and then you need to wait a few minutes for that enablement to take place. But this is a very important step that you need to do before you can meaningfully work using Web IDE for HANA. So we can see that the status has now changed to enabled. We've got some nice messages further down. So the work has been done. Basically, an application has been deployed into the developer space, which is the application that's used by Web IDE for HANA when you're actually wanting to build your own applications in that space. So basically, everything is very neatly sandboxed between the different spaces and organizations on your XS Advanced system. So now good with that, we can close that window. What we now need to do is find Web IDE for HANA, and for that you need to look again in the application monitor, and here we see there's Web IDE, that's the name of the app, and there's a URL, and again if you want you can click on it and it will open it up. Now in our case it says forbidden because we haven't actually authorized the XS administrator user to be a developer fully within this. So you can see it's forbidden, but you can see we've got the URL. In fact, it's port 53075. So I'm going to maybe bookmark that URL. So let's go and bookmark it. So we've got it for next time. We can call it Web IDE for HANA. And then the easy way, we could open a new incognito tab, or I could just close all of this, which will effectively log me out, come back into Chrome and hit this. And this time I'm going to log in as my developer user, XSA_dev, with the password we specified. Now the first time, as I mentioned, you're going to need to change it. So let's do that. So this is Web IDE for HANA. You can see you get some tips and tricks the first time. You can turn that off if you want, or you can look at it, or you can close. So I've just closed it. Now, if we want to absolutely verify that the configuration has been done, because quite often it can be omitted to do the space enablement, for example, on your space, what you can do is actually just build a very quick test application. So if I right mouse button on my workspace, I can choose New, then Project from Template, and I'm going to choose a multi-target application project. Let's give it a name. Let's call it Test, for example. Okay, now you should see at the bottom it's asking for a space, and here you should be able to select that space that you've set up and configured, so dev in our case. So the space is set up, hit next and hit finish. So we're working within that space, and then within test we want to maybe build a micro app. So we could start with something just like a simple Node.js module. It's a good one to test with. We can call this one test.js, for example. And we can enable XSJS support. That's a detail for now. It's just a test app. Let's finish. Now the important part is that having built that, we need to build it. And this is where we'll be able to see if the build actually works. So we can see that it actually worked, completed successfully. So we should be able to go ahead and actually start working with this. So we can actually choose the run option. So for that, let's go to run as Node.js application. So we can see the application is now running. That's in the console. And if you want to open it, we can just click on this. This is the URL that was assigned 51009. And it opens up our app, index.js, and we can see hello world. So we've been able to come into Web IDE for HANA and actually build an application. So our configuration is complete. We've got a user XSA_dev that's able to go ahead and build applications in the dev space that we also just configured. Thanks for watching. You'll find more videos and playlists on our YouTube channel. Also consider following us on Twitter or connect with us on LinkedIn.